Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is Bava Kamma daf Membet. We are at the very top of Membet Amud Aleph, actually on the fifth line. First word on the line is Tanya. And let's just sort of review where we are because we're sort of in the middle of something. Um, in particular, so I'm going to share my screen. In particular, we saw yesterday the Gemara analyzed the verse in the Torah. It's Sefer Shmot, Parakuf Aleph, Pasuk Kafet. This is in Parshas Mishpatim, that discusses an ox that kills a person. Um, and so, and so the pasuk says, turn to the pasuk. To pasuk says, the Chiyigach Shuar es ish o es ishava mace. So you have an ox that gores a man or a woman, and the person dies. Sakol yisakel. Sure. The ox should certainly be stoned. Below yeachel es bisaro, and you should not eat the meat of that shore. Ubal hashor naki, and the owner of that ox will be clean, will be essentially not guilty. And so what is that last phrase come to teach us? So we saw yesterday, the primary view was we saw cited a barisa that said that this tells us that it's prohibited to benefit from the ox that is to be stoned. That you not only can you not eat the meat, but you cannot even benefit from the meat. And in particular, actually, I think that now I'm looking back at that. I think that might be incorrect. Let me just double check. Right. So we said that. Yes, no, that's right, exactly. That the fact that it says, why does it say that you cannot eat it? It's to tell you that you cannot eat it even if it was slaughtered properly after it was sentenced to death. So even if you slaughtered it properly, then you still can't eat it. And the added language of the owner of the ox shall be clean is to tell you that you cannot benefit from it. We then saw another teaching that said, "Oh no, it's not that." And this was a teaching of Rabbi Abahu, where it was the fact that it just says "lo yeachel" tells you both no eating and no benefiting. In which case, the fact that the Torah says the owner of the ox shall be clean, well, then it doesn't. It also prohibits the hide of the ox. That is to be stoned, and so you're not allowed to benefit from the hide, not just from the meat. So that was a second sort of a subversion of Brisa number one that we learned that, and then Brisa number two, we then said that during the course of the Gemara, after teaching Brisa number one, we noted that there were a number of other viewpoints with respect to what the last words of that pasuk, the owner of the ox shall be clean, Bal Hashor Naki, what that teaches. And so the second brisa that we cited yesterday on this issue was had as the author Rabbi Eliezer, and Rabbi Eliezer said that it comes to teach us that even that if the ox is a tam, then there's no requirement for a half kofar payment. That ordinarily you might think that a tam would offer a kofar payment, and we said no, we're not going to and maybe it would be a half payment, just like a tam with respect to other kinds of damages pays half. So I might think that if the Tom Ox killed a person through goring, it would also pay half of the kofar payment. And the Brisa says that Rabbi Eliezer learns from the words Bal Hashor Naki. No, in that situation, the owner of the ox will not need to pay for the damages. And we asked on that, Rabbi Akiva asked on that Brisa and said, hey, Rabbi Eliezer, why do you need to even teach that? Because after all, If the ox needs to be stoned, well, then it's going to be worthless. And we know that the owner of a tom animal, when a tom animal does damage, only pays the damage from the value of the tom animal itself. And so as a result, they're capped with the value of the tom animal. And now this tom animal is worthless because you're not allowed to benefit from it. So there's no value to it. So why do you need to tell me, Rebbe Eliezer, that there's no requirement for a half kofar payment? Of course, there's no requirement for a half kofar payment because you can't benefit from that ox. So Rebbe Eliezer offered a few different answers. First, the first answer that he offered was about saying that, well, what if there's only one witness, or if the only person that causes the ox to be liable is the owner of the ox himself, and so in those situations, the ox will not be liable for the death penalty. Um, that's not the greatest answer we saw yesterday, but the answer that was an even better answer was the second answer that was given, and it was where the ox intended to kill somebody, to kill an animal, let's say, where there would be no liability, and accidentally killed the person. Well, in that case, our conclusion was the ox will not be liable for the death penalty. And so as a result, there would be no prohibition to benefit from the ox. And so there would be still value to the ox. And so in that situation, we would need to tell you that the owner of the ox shall be clean, teaches us that even in that situation, the owner of the tom ox that does not need to be killed will still not need to make the half kofar payment because the ox is tom and not a muad. Okay, so having said all that, we now have a second. A third brisa that offers a third explanation, but a second that is different from our original explanation of saying that it prohibits the benefiting from the ox that is to be stoned. So the third brisa is going to be Rabbi Yossi Aglili, and then we'll have actually a fourth brisa where Rabbi Akiva will come into the picture. So let's take it a look. We'll begin picking up fifth line, Membet Amud Aleph, Tanya Ida. So Tanya Ida, we learned in another brisa, another lesson about Bal Hashor Naki, that the owner of the ox is clean. So Rabbi Yossi Aglili Omer, Naki midmei vladot, that what you're clean from, what you don't have to do anything about, is paying for the damage of offspring. Now, there are psukim in the Torah. I should have left open my chumash, where it says in Parakuf Aleph, Pasuk Kaf Bet. Again, this is part of Parshas Mishpatim, where it says, "V'chi anashim v'nagfu isha harav yatsu yiladeha." When men are fighting and they hurt a woman who is pregnant, and her child comes out, and so as a result she has miscarried. V'lo yiyason, but she doesn't die. Anosh yeyanesh kasher yashis alav bal haisha b'nasan biflilim. That so then the person who did the harm is going to be fined according to the woman's husband. That's going to be, and he's going to have to pay as the judges determine. So what's the determination? It's going to be based on the value that child has or would have had, and as a result, that's going to be there's going to be a payment. So what Rabbi Yossi Aglili is saying is, when you don't have a person damaging a pregnant woman and causing a miscarriage, well then, and you have it's an ox that causes it. The owner of the ox is not going to be liable for it. As Rashi says very clearly, fifth line down in the narrow lines of Rashi, midmei vladot nagach es haisha, where the ox gored a woman, v'yatsu yiladeha, and the child came out, meaning that it was a miscarriage. And so Amar Rabbi Akiva asks a question. Hare hu Omer, the Torah already tells us, ki yinatsu anashim, that it's that what the when is there going to be liability? There's only going to be liability when there are people that are fighting. Anashim v'lo shvarim. Doesn't that imply that the liability is limited to human causing of the fetus to be aborted and not an ox causing it? Shapir Kamma Rabbi Akiva. And the Gemara notes that Rabbi Akiva asks a good question because that's the end of the brisa. We don't have any response. So the Gemara is now going to offer 4 different responses to Rabbi Akiva's question. Okay, so let's take a look at them. So Rav Ula Brei de Rav Edi. Rav Ula offers the first one. It's trich. We need to have Rabbi Yossi Aglili because it's not enough to learn from Ki Natsu Anashim because Salka Daita Chamina Anashim Velo Shvarim Hadoma Limla Anashim. That I might have thought that that when we say Anashim, the thing that we're excluding is oxen that are comparable to Anashim. And Ma Anashim Muadim, Ashvarim Muadim. That since mankind is always considered muad, so the only thing that anashim will exclude is a muad ox. And so hatam mechayev, but maybe if the ox was only a tam ox, it would be obligated. So kazav rachmana balashur naki de patur, and so that's why the Torah had to write the balashur naki in order to tell us that even that tam ox is going to be absolved and not have to pay any the damage for the loss of the fetus. Amar Rava is shocked by that answer because what did that answer imply? That answer somehow implied that there would be greater liability for a tam than for a muad. That seems unusual. Yatziva ba'ara v'giyura b'shmei shemaya. How could you have that the Yitziva, a local person, a person who is native, is going to be on the land, and they're going to be stuck on the ground, and the stranger, the Giora, Bishmei Shemaya, is going to be up in the heavens? How are you going to raise up the thing that should be lowered and lower the thing that should be raised? So therefore, Rava offers a second approach. So let's take a look at Rava's approach. Ella Amar Rava Itzrich. No, we need the language for the following reason. Because exact same start as Rav Ula. That I would have thought that just as you exclude the thing that Anashim excludes is oxen that are similar to Anashim. Ma'anashim muadim, ashvarim muadim. So it excludes an ox that is a muad. But kavachomer latamim. And certainly it would also, prevent you from being liable for a tam animal. So hadar because of Rahmana balashur naki. And so as a result, the Torah writes that the owner of the ox is absolved because what is it trying to tell us is tam patur umuad chayav. That actually, when Rabbi Yossi Aglili is telling us that the owner of the ox is absolved from having to pay the value of the offspring, he's only talking about a tam ox. And really, if it's a muad ox, tam patur umuad chayav, a muad ox would be obligated. So Abaye doesn't like that answer. So Amrle Abaye says to Rava, listen, Elamiata Gabi Boshas Nami Nemahachi. The argument that you're making that says basically Anashim excludes Shvarim. That same argument should also apply to the obligation to pay for damages associated not just with a terminated pregnancy, a miscarriage, but it should also apply to boshes nami nemahachi with respect to humiliation, with respect to embarrassment. That should also apply for embarrassment. So anashim below shvarim hadomim la'anashim. Same logic would apply. Ma anashim muadim ashvarim muadim. But kal v'chomer l'tamim l'tibetire, and the same kind of kal v'chomer. And hadar kasav rachmana balashur naki tam patur muad chayav. And so as a result, that seems to be that you could make the exact same argument with respect to the obligation of the owner of an ox to pay for embarrassment fees. So v'chitema hachinami, and if you say, oh well, maybe actually a muad ox, the owner of a muad ox is obligated to pay for embarrassment. That's going to be a problem because ihachi lisne when Rabbi Yossi taught his teaching, he should say bala shor naki Rabbi Yossi aglila omer pater midmei vladot umi boshes. He should also reference boshes in this in the brisa that we just cited. So he did not. So that implies that that whatever we're talking about is only true with respect to offspring and to a miscarriage, and not true with respect to embarrassment. So as a result, that doesn't work. So therefore, we're going to offer a third explanation. So Ella Abaye Rava de Amri Tarvayu. So Abaye worked with Rava, and they came up with another answer. Anashim ein ason beisha yeanshu. That when we say that there are men that are involved, that is talking about in the Torah, that's a situation where the woman did not die. That's key because yesh ason beisha lo yeanshu. If the men had killed the woman, right? If the fighting of the men had resulted in the death of the woman, she would not. They would not be obligated to pay anything because of the principle of kumle b'derabamine, that they would only get the death penalty. And so as a result, that would be the situation, or whoever did the damage and killed the woman would get the death penalty. V'lo shvarim de'afal gav yeshason yeanshu. And so what the Torah is saying by telling us about anashim is to say that that is only true when humans cause the damage. That if humans cause the woman to die, they won't be subject to having to pay for the vlad, for having to pay for the miscarriage. But if they shvarim do it, then even if the woman were to die, maybe the owner would be liable for the payment of the damage to the fetus and for the fetus's miscarriage. So hadar kasav rachmana bal hashor nakida patur. And so that's why the Torah needs to tell us that the owner of the ox is clean, because the owner of the ox is clean from having to pay even if the woman is killed. So as a result, so now we have a good explanation. But Rav Ada bar Ahava doesn't like that explanation. Now, Rav Ada bar Ahava's question is going to relate to something that relates to a debate between the rabbis and Rabbi Shimon in Sanhedrin. And Daf Ayin Tet Amud Aleph, where the rabbis say that the death penalty applies when one has intent to kill, even if one kills the wrong person. Whereas Rabbi Shimon says the death penalty, and therefore the application of the principle of kumle b'derabamine, applies only when the intended target is the victim. And so Rav Ada, who agrees with Rabbi Shimon, therefore doesn't like Abaye and Rava's answer, because Abaye and Rava's answer only fits with the rabbis. Because what happened here? What happened is we had two people who were fighting, and they accidentally killed the woman, and we're telling us that it's only when they didn't kill the woman that they would be liable for the damage to the fetus. But if they did kill the woman, they would not be. But according to Rabbi Shimon's approach that says that if you kill the wrong person, and here they weren't trying to kill this woman, they were trying to fight each other. And so as a result, when they killed the wrong person, there would not be, according to Rabbi Shimon, the principle of kumle b'derabamine, and there would continue to be liability. So maskif Rav Ada bar Ahava atu ba'ason talya milsa. 1 second, are you conditioning the liability on the death of the woman? That doesn't make sense. The kavana talya milsa, it's dependent on the intention of the murderer. Only if they intended to kill the woman and she was killed would they not be liable for the death of the fetus and the monetary costs associated with that. So as a result, Rav Ada bar Ahava offers answer number 4. Now again, the answer that we had for answer number 3 works It just doesn't work according to everybody. So Ella Amar of Ada Barahava, Anashim, Kinis Kavnu Zelazeh, Af al Gav Sheyesh Ason Beisha Yeanshu. So again, applying Rabbi Shimon's attitude, they say Rav Ada explains that when we say anashim, it's telling us that only with respect to humans, where there's only where there's no intent, even when there's the death of the woman, as long as there's no intention to kill the woman, they will still have to pay the monetary fees associated with the death of the fetus. However, if they in fact intended to kill the woman herself, well, then they would not be punished monetarily because of the principle of kumle b'derabamine, and they would be killed. The lo shvarim, but that does not apply to oxen. Because they are going to be punished, meaning that their owners are going to be punished monetarily, even if the ox intends to kill the woman. So that's different from the humans. So therefore, kasav rachmana balashur naki to petire, and therefore that's why the Torah needs to also add the concept of balashur naki to tell us that, as according to what Rabbi Yossi Aglili says in our brisa, that specifically in that situation, the owner of the ox is not going to be liable. And so even though the pasuk itself might suggest that the ox would be liable, even if it intended to kill the woman, that there would be no liability, there would be liability for the dead fetus as well. So therefore, Balashur Naki tells us no, there's no liability for the dead fetus in that situation. Okay. V'chein kiyasa Rav Chagai miduroma, when Rav Chagai came from the south, asa va'aiti masnisa bidei kavase de Rav Ada Barahava. He taught a brisa. He brought with him a brisa that actually explained Rabbi Yossi Aglili the way Rav Ada Barahava did. So we're not going to actually cite that brisa. We're just going to note that he brought that brisa with him. Okay. So that was explanation number 3 for the line Baal Hashor Naki. Now we come to the 4th and final explanation of Baal Hashor Naki. Specifically, we're going to say, offer an explanation for Rabbi Akiva. So Tanya Idach, we got one more. Baal Hashor Naki, what does that come to teach us? Rabbi Akiva Omer, Naki Midmei Eved, that you don't have to pay for a killed slave. Now, ordinarily, if your ox kills a slave, now we're presumably talking about a tam ox killing a slave. So you would not need to. So if a muad ox kills a slave, we know that the Torah gives us a set amount that needs to be paid. It's 30 shkalim, or 30 30 sela, which are equivalent amounts, 30 sela, no matter what the value of the slave is, that is what is going to be obligated to be paid. So the name of Rabbi Akiva L'nafshe, well, 1 second, but Rabbi Akiva should be able to ask the question that he's asked all along, and that he specifically asked Rabbi Eliezer, and that I mentioned at the beginning of our daf today, in reviewing yesterday's daf. He should be able to ask that question on himself, namely, the halo atzmo ein mishtalam ela megufo. The person is only obligated, the owner of the ox is only obligated to pay from the value of the ox itself. So havienu lebeis din v'yishalem lecha. So the person, the owner of the ox should be able to say, listen, bring me the ox, bring the ox to court, and the ox will pay you, because I am only going to be obligated what the ox is worth, and now this ox is going to be killed, and so as a result, it's worth nothing. So you can do whatever you want. I'm essentially judgment proof. So doesn't that same question that Rabbi Akiva asked so pointedly to Rabbi Eliezer apply also here? So Amar Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak, kishikadam balav ushkato. No, it's talking about a situation where the owner slaughtered the ox before it was executed. And so as a result, Mao de Tema, what might you have thought? Lishtalamine. Maybe the ox still has some value as a slaughtered animal, and it might be edible, and therefore you would be allowed to collect from it. So Kamash Malan. So therefore the Torah teaches us Hoel Uvar Katalahu, since it's liable to the death penalty, even if it was slaughtered, you would not be allowed. You would not be allowed to have the payment come from it. But 1 second, if in fact that was the case, you could have said that about Rabbi Eliezer's situation. Remember, Rabbi Eliezer's explanation was that the meaning of the owner of the ox is clean. Let's just go back and we'll remind ourselves of it, is the fact that if the ox is a tam, there's no requirement for the half kofar payment. So why not just say that we're talking about where the ox was slaughtered, and so therefore you might have thought that you would have to pay the half kofar payment because there was still some value. So why doesn't that work? Why doesn't that work for Rabbi Eliezer? So Hachinami, yeah, actually, Rabbi Eliezer could have answered this. The suburb, and what Rabbi Akiva thought was Dilma Islay Taima Achrina the Adav Mihai. Maybe he has an even better learning, and that would Benemalay, and I'll get him to tell it by having asked him the question. So yes, the same answer could have worked for Rabbi Eliezer, but I wanted to hear what Rabbi Eliezer said, and Rabbi Eliezer gave a different answer. Well, 1 second, the Rabbi Eliezer nami lishani le'lishikadim shchata. Well, why didn't Rabbi Eliezer give the answer that Rabbi Akiva has given? Because Amar Lach, Rabbi Eliezer would tell you, Hasam hu diniskavin laharoges habehema v'harages ha'adam. When I change the intention to shor lava katalahu kalal, in my situation where I say that the animal intended to kill an animal and instead killed a person, that animal is not obligated to be killed at all. And so as a result, that's why you might think that you would be liable. So it's that's why you need to have a verse come to exclude it. But in the situation where it was already liable for the death penalty and it was just slaughtered early, I would of course assume that it's no value. You don't really need a pasuk to tell us that the owner would still be exempt from the half kofar. So as a result, that's why he didn't bother. Rabbi Akiva nami vadai hachihava. And 1 second, isn't that a problem for Rabbi Akiva also? So Ella Amar Rav Asi provides an additional explanation that says, you know what? Let's change the situation. We don't have to say that we're talking about where the owner of the ox gored was slaughtered the ox before the court came, but rather we can have a different situation. So here's the story. Hi Milsa Mipi de Gavra Rabba Shmieli. And by the way, I heard this from a great man. Umanu, and who was that, by the way? Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina. It was this Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Chanina. Salka Amina, I might have thought that why is somebody obligated? Why would Rabbi Akiva think that somebody would be obligated if their Tom Shore killed a slave to pay the fee? We had back on Daf Lam and Gimel Amid Aleph the following situation where Rabbi Akiva taught something different from what we had. Rabbi Akiva said that if you have a man and an animal damaging each other, and the animal is a tam animal, and the man is damaged more than the animal, then the owner of the tam animal doesn't pay 50% of the extra damages that had happened to the man, but rather full extra damages that happened to the man. And so as a result, the principle is that Rabbi Akiva believes that if you have a tam axe that does damage to a person, there's full liability. So, given that there's full liability, so mishtalim nami demei eben ma'aliyah. I might have thought that the value of a slave would get paid in full. So therefore, kasav rachmana bala shornaki, and that's why we specifically say that you need to pay in full for that bala shornaki, that the owner of the ox is exempt, because the owner of the ox does not, in fact, have to pay for the slave. And so, because you might have thought that he does, and so as a result, that's why Rabbi Akiva needs to say that. Well, Amrle Rabbi Zera Lavasi. Zera said, 1 second. Rabbi Akiva Rabbi Akiva essentially cuts this off. So how could you say that Rabbi Akiva would ever think that there would be liability beyond the value of the tam ox itself? Because Tanya, Rabbi Akiva Omer, Yachol Yishalem min ha'aliyah. I might have thought that when the tam does wounds a human being, that the owner is going to have to pay from the best property, because after all, I believe that the owner is going to be obligated for the full damages associated with the damage caused by that tam ox to a human being. Talmud Lomar b'mishpat hazeh yaselo. The Torah specifically says, in accordance with this judgment, is going to be done to it. So migufo mishalem ve'enu mishalem min haliyah, that the law associated with the tam ox, that it only pays from its own value, that's the law that's going to apply, and we're not going to apply the law that says that you pay from the other property, from the value of higher property. And so therefore, your answer, Rav Asi, doesn't work, because your answer assumes that we don't have to worry about the value of the ox itself. But we know that Rabbi Akiva does worry about the value of the ox, and does limit the damages associated with that, that's done by a tam ox, to that value itself. So Elam Rava Itzrach. So Rava offers the following: Salkatai de Kamina, and this is the now the third approach. And so we have the following. So I might have thought, excuse me. I might have thought, that since the law of killing a slave by a muad ox is more stringent, is more strict than when a free person is killed by a muad ox. Why? Because sheben chorin yafasela nosin sell. Because when a regular human being is killed by an ox, if the person is worth 1 sela, well, then he gets paid 1 sela. His estate gets paid 1 sela for being killed. And shloshim, nosin shloshim. And if he's worth 30, then he gets 30. But evet, yafas sela nosin shloshim. But if a slave, even if he's worth only 1 sela, the owner of the slave is going to get paid 30 sela. So mishtalim nami demei eben min haliyah. That seems to imply that you pay from the best property, because and Tosos helps us out here by explaining that 1 second. In some ways, Tosos asks a question, answers it, and then helps us with the understanding. Because Tosos says, but there's a leniency associated with slaves. If we take a look at the third Tosos on Membet Amabet, the Afal Gav to Shavesh Kuf, Ein Notzen Ela Shloshim. Well, 1 second, isn't there a leniency? Because if it's worth 100, you only pay 30. Makom, nevertheless, Kaven Shenosin Kitzvah Shel Shloshim. Since you have a set amount of 30, Afal Pisha Ein Shava Ela Sela, even though the value of the slave is only worth 1 sela, O Yoter, or more, Shela Olam HaKitzvah Omedet, that it seems like the amount is always set. Im Kain Gam Kisha Hashor Ein Shava Klum Kayemet. I might have thought that even when the value of the goring ox is irrelevant to the damage. And so as a result, Kasav Rachmana Bala Shornaki. So the Torah specific, as we go back into the Gemara, therefore, specifically the Torah tells us that the owner of the ox is exempt, is clean, because it's telling us that even though you might have thought that the 30 is always No, the 30 is not always. When it's a Tom ox, you don't have to actually pay it. And Tiny Kavase de Rava. Actually, we have a brisa that confirms Rava's explanation, and we're going to learn the brisa, and it's going to confirm Rava. So here's the brisa. Bala Naki, the owner of the ox is clean. Rabbi Akiva Omer Naki Midmei Eved. You don't have to pay for killing a slave if it's a Tom ox. V'halo dinhu. And wait 1 second. Why do you need to tell me this, Rabbi Akiva? Isn't it something that's logical? After all, the Torah says liability for both a slave and a person. Just as we held that the liability for a free person is different between a tam and a muad. So I would differentiate between a tam and a muad when it comes to killing a slave. Indeed, you could say it's even a kal v'chomer. It's a strong argument. When it comes to a free human, that you pay whatever the value is. And yet we differentiate between a tam and a muad. A slave that only gets paid 30, shouldn't you certainly make that kind of distinction? Shouldn't we certainly differentiate? Lo, no, Rabbi Akiva responds, because Machar Marinai, the Eved Yoter mi ben Chorin, there's an aspect of a slave that's more strict than a free person. Shig ben Chorin, Yafa Sella, Yono Saint Sella, because a free person who's worth only 1 Sella, the owner gets just the ox's owner only has to give 1 Sella. But and Shloshim, no sin Shloshim, but if he's worth 30, then he gets 30. The Eved Yafet Sella, no sin Shloshim, but when it comes to a slave that's worth 1 Sella, excuse me, he has to pay 30. So Yachol Yehi Chayav, I might have thought that obligation to pay the 30 should happen no matter what. So therefore, Talmud Lover, Balashur Naki Midmei Evet. And therefore, you are exempt from the paying the damage of an Eved. So we have 4 different explanations of Baal Hashor Naki. Okay, so now the Gemara continues. Tana Rabbanan, the Hamis Ish Oisha. Now, what happens? We said we know the Psukim, we quoted the pasuk at the beginning, and we're quoting it now as quoting a different pasuk now. That if the ox kills a man or a woman, that you're going to have to pay damages. So why do we repeat it twice? Because first we say, excuse me, first we say, v'chiyigach shor es ish o es isha v'meis sakol yisakel ashor v'lo ye'achel b'saro b'al ashor naki. So we see that the man and woman are comparable. V'im shor nagahu mitmol shom v'hua b'valav lo yishmerenu v'hemis ish o isha hashor yisakel v'gam ba'alav yumas. And then we say again, im kofer yushas alav nasan pijon nafsho kechol asher yushas alav. So the point is, I'm sorry, that we don't need that last pasuk. So the point is that we repeat twice the fact that man or woman is being gored here. So Amar Rabbi Akiva v'chimaba zelamdnu lelamdenu. What is this coming to teach us? Because im lechayev al ha'isha keish, if you want to tell me that it's telling us that the liability for a man and a woman are identical. It already said it in the previous pasuk. Gach shor es ish o es isha. Excuse me. So Ella lahakish ish isha leish. Rather, what is coming to tell us is to make the comparable situation of a man and a woman. Ma ish nizakav liyorshav. When it comes to a man who is killed, the damage award goes to his heirs and specifically not to the wife. Isha nizaga liyorshav. Also, the damages that are due to the wife's estate will go to her heirs and not to her husband. As Rashi says, it's right about in the middle of the narrow lines of Rashi, nizaka liyorshav v'lo lebala, not to her husband. So v'sava Rabbi Akiva lo yoris labal. Does Rabbi Akiva actually think that the husband doesn't inherit his wife? That doesn't make sense because we know he does. But Tanya, the Yorish Osa, that he's going to inherit her. Mikansha Bal Yorish is Ishto. Divrei Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva himself specifically says that a man inherits his wife. So Amaresh Lakish, Lo Amar Ella Bakofer. This statement about a man, the husband, not inheriting the wife, is only about the kofer that's paid as a result of her death. Because because it only gets paid after she dies. And so it's only something that she is fit to receive. And a husband doesn't take possession of what is fit to be taken like he takes for things that she actually has possession of. So there's a difference. Well, my time, but what's the difference? So Amar Kra, Vehemis Ish Oisha, Hashor Yisakel, Begam Ba'alav Yumas, Im Kofer Yushas Alav. That the Torah says that if it killed a man or a woman, the ox is going to be stoned, and even its owner is going to die. But when Kofer is going to be assessed against him. So the point is that even though we say in the Torah that the owner is going to die, the Torah immediately notes the possibility of payment, and the payment is essentially in order to allow the owner to avoid the penalty of death. Lo Amar Rabbi Akiva. But when it comes to debt, so therefore, that's why we specifically tell it that basically Kofer is only assessed after the victim dies. And so there's no liability to the woman until she dies. And so as a result, this is only ro'ila. It's only fit for her to get. It's not actually in her possession. And so as a result, the people who receive it are only her heirs and not her husband. So Uvenizakin, lo Amar Rabbi Akiva. Well, 1 second. Are you telling me that when it comes to other damages besides Kofer, Rabbi Akiva would say that the husband inherits the wife? We have another statement that seems to suggest that when it comes to other things that the wife is already due, if in fact she were to die, the husband would not get. Because listen to this brisa. Now the brisa has a number of different rules. We're going to care about other of the rules tomorrow, but today we're going to focus just on the rule that matters. So hika es ha'isha v'yatzu yeladeha. If somebody strikes a woman and she miscarries, no nezek v'tzar leisha. You have to pay the damages and the pain to the woman. That's what she's entitled to. Udmei vladot. But the value of the children that are lost, lebal, that goes to the husband. Ein habal, if the husband is not around, is no longer alive, no sain liyorsha. So then that value of the offspring goes to the husband's heirs. Ein ha'isha, if the woman's not around, meaning that she's not alive, so then when she's supposed to be getting the tsar and the nezek, the damages and the pain, the pain and the damages, excuse me, no saying liyorsheha, they get given to her heirs. Whoa, that's something that she's entitled to during her lifetime, right? We saw 2 moments ago that she's supposed to get this, so it's not something that is only roila, and yet it goes to her heirs and not to her husband. So Haisa Shifcha, and now we add another rule. If the injured woman was a Shifcha v'nishtachrara, and it was a woman who was a slave, a non-Jewish slave who was freed, and so as a result she has no heirs. Okiyores, or she was a convert, and again she has no heirs. So Zacha, well then in that situation, the damager lucks out, and he gets to have it. But the bottom line is we had a rule that said that if she's not around, then even though this is something that her husband should inherit of hers, because after all, she was entitled to it while she was alive, so it should be muchsachla, it should be as if she's holding it, and yet we see that it's not. So doesn't that undermine the whole distinction that we made? So no, because Amar Rabba, and again, we're now just to clarify where we're located, we're at the top line of Mem Gimel Amid Aleph. So Amar Rabba, Begrusha, no, we're talking about a divorcee. V'chein amar Rav Nachman b'gerusha, and Rav Nachman also said we're talking about a divorced woman. So the point is that she's divorced, and so as a result, that's why the husband doesn't inherit her any longer. Of course, now we have to understand, why did the husband get anything, or why is the husband getting, the benefit of the offspring? So that's going to be the question that we're going to be dealing with tomorrow. So you'll have to stay tuned for tomorrow's doc. But the point is that right now we've at least resolved the issue with respect to Rabbi Akiva's ruling, and we understand that Rabbi Akiva says that something that a woman is already entitled to goes to her husband, something that the woman is not yet entitled to and is only going to be entitled to after her death will go to her heirs and not to her husband. And so we'll pick up with the top line of Mem Gimel Amud Aleph, God willing, tomorrow. Look forward to continuing our learning together. Have a wonderful day.